Okay, I think I'm live. So we got a couple minutes till we're officially starting, but if anybody's out there, you can type to me in the chat. And we'll be starting the mask making tutorial in a few more minutes. Give it time to get to the hour. Hey, Robin! Hello! Oh, I'm so glad someone's watching. We got your email, Robin, your response to the newsletter. It was really sweet. So thanks for sending that. I passed it along to everybody on staff. And yeah, you just get a little inside view into my home, my crazy bulletin board. And who knows, my cat might even make a cameo appearance at some point. You never can tell with him. So we'll give it another minute or two until the actual hour. And I know today's press briefing got moved to 4:45, so sorry that we're now in conflict with that at some point during this, but you can always pause this and watch the rest of it later, or watch that later. Thanks, Robin. I like my bulletin board too. It has lots of fun pictures of friends and wedding invitations and buttons. And let's see, got a good view of George. This is the dog I used to dog sit for in Boston. He's a very, very lovely elderly dog. George, he's a good man. Yeah, the main CDC, Dr. Shaw and Janet Mills, they usually brief at 2 now, but they moved it to 4:45 for today because of some other things that were going on. So tune in there either then or later if you don't want to watch this whole thing. All right. Okay, I think it's about 4 o'clock, so I'm going to start actually sharing the information that this is intended to share. So if anyone who is out there watching now or in the future does not know, I'm Hannah. I'm the Assistant Director at the Blue Hill Library. So we are currently all at home, staying safe, but we still want to try to find a way to get this information out to people and connect with people and yeah, spread some good information. So I'm going to be doing a mask making tutorial with a couple different patterns. One of them I'm going to use the sewing machine for, and the second one I'm going to hand sew so that if you don't have a sewing machine at home, you'll sort of get a little tutorial for that as well. There is a live chat that Robin is making good use of so far. So if you've got questions as I go, feel free to ask them there, and I'll try to keep an eye on that as I go and answer questions along with you. I want to start with a little bit of PSA around mask making, which is that number one, you want to make sure that you have washed your hands before you start making your mask. Obviously, we're all washing our hands a lot. So I have already done that, but if you are going to follow along with me, make sure you go wash your hands right now, get them nice and clean. Don't worry, I'll be talking for at least the next 20 seconds before I do anything. I included some links in the description of this video to various patterns and tutorials and other resources. So if you look down below me in the description, you should be able to expand it out and find the links to the patterns that I'm using, as well as a couple other sources, including a really great video by Sydney McElroy, who is a favorite podcaster of mine and also a doctor, about how to properly put on and take off a face mask, especially if you're going to be taking it off while you're out in public, like if you're working somewhere and you need to take a lunch break to eat. So I recommend watching that. That's really helpful. And yeah, make sure your hands are clean. Make sure you clean the whole surface that you're going to be working on. Make sure your fabric is clean. So run that through the wash before you sew it. That's a good thing to do normally anyway, because sometimes it'll shrink in the wash. But especially right now, just make sure it's nice and clean. And as the CDC has said, and every health authority has said, wearing a cloth mask is not intended to be instead of any of the other guidance about social distancing and staying home as much as possible. So make sure that if you do make a mask and wear it out, that's great. It can be an added layer of protection for you, but don't think that by wearing it, you are not needing to be 6 feet away from other people, not needing to stay home when you can. So let's get started. I'm going to start with the pattern, the first one that I linked, which is from Providence St. Joseph Health. This is one that my mom sent me that she has used to make a lot of masks. Thanks, Mom. And this one is basically one big piece of fabric that you're going to then fold in half, so it has 2 layers for your mask, and then 2 long strips that you're going to sew to the sides, which will then form the 4 ties. Oh, hi, Mom. She's listening. So this one has ties rather than elastic. The second one that I'm going to do after this is going to be one that uses elastic, and you could sort of mix and match once I've shown you both of them if you'd prefer to have elastic, if you do have elastic at home. I'm going to use this fun French material because it doesn't have to be scary and depressing. It can be fun material. And this is just some extra fabric I have left over from an old project. So this is all a new experiment, so bear with me as we orient ourselves here. But I have cut out a pattern piece based on the dimensions in this pattern just because that's easiest for me. I usually work with sewing patterns. You can also definitely just measure the dimensions right on the fabric and either draw on it or cut it out. I really don't think you have to be too precious with this project. It's not a wedding gown. It's not going to be a family heirloom. You're just trying to get the job done. So you want one big rectangle that is 7.5 by 14.5 inches. That is the size of this piece of newspaper. And you're going to cut out fabric that's that size. So let's see here. I'm going to kind of line it up here. I think you can see that pretty well. And because I'm using a pattern piece, I'm just going to pin it to the fabric so that it doesn't move around while I'm cutting it out. Again, you could totally just grab a ruler or something and measure out, 14.5 by 7.5 and just mark it on the fabric with a pen. That is totally allowed. But for me, since I've already made one of these, I cut out a pattern piece for myself, and that's what I'm going to use. So I'm not going to worry too much about pinning it really thoroughly. I'm just going to do a pin on each of the 4 corners of this rectangle. And I've got my nice sewing scissors. If you don't have specific sewing scissors, you can use just regular scissors, kitchen shears, something sharp helps. So now that I have cut that out, I'm just gonna go right along the edge of the pattern here. One of the things that I like about sewing is that it's very forgiving. Cutting is the only part that's really permanent. So do try to pay attention while you're cutting so you're not like having the fabric folded over underneath itself and cutting into it in a way that you don't want to do. So this is really the one part that you can't undo. And if you don't have fabric at home just lying around from other projects, there's lots of different things you could cannibalize to make a mask. Seems like most of the recommendations are to use 100% cotton. Basically, you want to use something with a really thick weave because that's going to help keep more particles out. So you could recycle a pillowcase or an old napkin. There's some no-sew instructions for how to make these out of a t-shirt that you basically just cut apart into a mask shape, which I'm not going to go over step by step here, but I did link to them. Robin says, Karen K. Buckley makes the best sewing scissors. I don't know them. These are really nice scissors that I got. They have my name on them. I don't know if you can see that on the video. It's probably backwards, but I got them from when I was working for the theater department at Bowdoin during college. That was a sort of senior gift to us. Okay, so this is our rectangle that we've just cut out, our fun French rectangle. And the next step we're going to do for this one is to fold it in half. We're going to put it what's called right sides together. So you're making 2 layers, and one end is going to have a fold. The other end are these raw edges. And right now my pretty pattern is kind of obscured because it's all on the inside. So we're going to sew it together and then turn it inside out. So I'll show you when we get there. And so again, I'm just putting a few pins in here, not trying to be too precious with it because this is not going to last forever anyway. But I usually put a pin on one end and a pin on the other, and then I sort of stretch it a little bit so that the fabric is evenly distributed between them, so you don't get any bunching. Sometimes if you start on one end and work your way along seam to the other, you end up with it like not very aligned at the end. So if you start on each end, I'm just gonna clip this a little bit. There we go. First seam that we're gonna sew. And I don't really know why this pattern chose to do it as like one rectangle with a fold rather than 2 rectangles. I think it's just so that there's fewer seams that you have to do. That's one nice feature of it, is that since this end is already connected, we don't have to worry about sewing that end together. So let's come over to the sewing machine. I'll do a teensy tiny little sewing machine tutorial in case you're not used to using one. Maybe you've got one hanging out in your garage or something that you decided to dig out for this purpose, but they're all a little bit different in terms of how you thread them. Usually you can Google your make and model and find either an owner's manual or lots of instructional videos online about how to thread your particular machine. But generally your spool of thread's gonna go kind of near the upper right of the machine, and you're gonna work your way sort of to the left and down till you get to the needle here. So in my case, there's a little hooky here near the top. Then we go down and into this little disc, and we pull that up. So that's what puts the tension on the thread as you go. And then it goes through this eye and that kind of looper. This is the bit that's going to go up and down as you sew. There is another little hooky here. And then bring my needle back up. I'm going to go through the eye of my needle. So again, that's probably going to look pretty different depending on what machine you have at home, but that's the basic gist of it, and that's how to do mine. So now I'm going to put you back over here so you'll get to see it from the other side. And there's also a bobbin thread that goes underneath. So that's how the sewing actually works, is that the needle that I just threaded goes down, picks up the bobbin thread, and sort of loops the 2 threads together. So that bobbin is down there. I'm going to go around just one time with my wheel to pull that thread up. Now everything is ready to go for me to sew. This pattern calls for a 1/4 inch seam. So on most sewing machines, there's a little gauge right next to the needle. They'll tell you how many 1/8 of an inch. So 1/4 inch is 2/8. And for me, that's just basically the edge of the presser foot is going to be against the edge of the fabric. So the presser foot is operated on my machine by this little lever. I'm going to put it down when I'm ready to sew. And apologies, because the audio is probably not going to be really nice to listen to while I'm running the machine, but it's a short seam, so it shouldn't last for long. I'm going to go just a couple stitches forward, and then I'm going to throw my machine into reverse and go a few stitches backward. and then back forward again, and that helps kind of anchor your seam so that it doesn't slip out. And I'm just gonna go all the way down the edge of my fabric. And then when I get to the end, I'm gonna backtrack again and then finish off. And again, that'll just keep it secure at both ends. I have fun special little scissors. I have many pairs of little scissors, which is great because sometimes I take them and leave them in other parts of the house. So I'm just going to clip off those long tails of thread. Okay, so now we've got our long rectangle is folded into more of a square. And we turn it inside out. And you see here's the seam that we just sewed. The other end is just a fold. And we're ready to roll. So I'm actually going to press that seam just so it's nice and crisp. This is definitely not required. This is sort of extra credit. Just making a mask for yourself to wear to the grocery store. It doesn't need to be super perfect, but if you do have an iron and you want to give it a quick press, make sure I don't knock my computer off of the table with my ironing board. There we go. Just let my iron heat up for a second. So I've got it so that I can see that seam I just made. I'm gonna open it up a little bit so that the seam is sitting flat. And I'm just gonna press it like that so it's nice and flat. Just refilled my iron with some water before we started, so it's very steamy. All right. And if you don't have an iron and you wanna get it a little flatter, you can just sort of lay it out and squish it down with your hands. Even that'll help a little bit with getting it sort of more crisp. There you go, just a quick little press. And now I'm going to turn the whole thing back right side out. You can press it again now that I've got it in the right direction. Just sort of push that seam down. I'm going to give it a good press. And then I'll also press the top where the fold is, just so we have a nice crease up there so we know where that edge is. Great. That iron might beep at some point because it usually beeps at me even after I think I've turned it off. Okay, so now we've got more of a square. This is going to be the bulk of our face mask. And the next thing we're going to do is add our pleats. So the pleats help the mask sort of contour more to your face. And, you know, they make it look like a mask. So it has that advantage. I actually marked the pleats on my pattern that I cut out so that it'd be easy for me to find them. That's all these little black lines on the edge here. But the distances are noted in the pattern. And I can tell them to you. So if you're going up from the bottom, you're going to make a mark at 1.5 inches from the bottom, then 2 1/4 inches, then 3 inches, 4 inches, 5 inches, and 5 3/4. So they're, you know, 1 inch-ish apart with a little bit of variation. And I know I went through those numbers kind of fast, but if you look at the pattern that's linked in the video description, you can find all those numbers as well. They do indicate in the pattern that you can make like just little incisions in the fabric at those marks. I'm probably just going to use a fabric pen or even maybe just a regular pen because I have one right here. Because again, it doesn't really matter. This is not going to be like a treasured object that you're going to hopefully not going to be a treasured object that you have to wear forever. So I'm just going to make those marks on my fabric with a regular old pen. And these will all be sort of hidden anyway when you add the little straps on. So for me, making a mark is easier than cutting, but whatever works for you is fine, just so you know where these spots are. Okay, so now you have your marks, and let's see, the top mark is here by the wheel of this car. So the top mark is sort of where you're going to grab the fabric, and then you're going to pull it down to 2 marks below it. And that means that it should be folding right around the mark that's in between them. So this is particularly hard to show, but basically, you're going to grab it at the top and fold it down to 2 dashes below that. And if you look at the fabric, which you probably can't see mine from the video, but there is a little black line right in there where the sort of center of the fold is. So that's what the marks are for you to be able to tell where to put your pleats. So once you've got that folded, I'm just going to take a pin. If you don't have straight pins for sewing, you can totally use safety pins for this. They're a little trickier to run your sewing machine over, but as long as you don't have the really big bulky head or bottom of the pin in the path of the sewing machine, that's fine. Or you can just sort of try to grab it while you are sewing and see how that works for you. I'm going to look back at the pattern here. Just make sure I'm doing this right. Right. So you take 1 and fold it down to 3. And then 4 through 6. Yep, so you really just do it twice. It's like very confusing for my brain, which is not good at spatial relations, that you do it twice, but then it looks like there's 3 pleats somehow. I don't know, I'm not good at that. But let's see. I'm gonna do it, and you do it on both sides. My work is below the screen view. Oh, sorry. I was mostly just looking at the pattern for a second there. So we've got 1 pleat pleated over here that we've just pinned. Oh, I'm coming from the wrong end? Yeah. This is, the top is the folded edge. So we took one of our lines, brought it down to a couple lines below it, and then I put a pin there just to hold the whole thing together. Actually, I think what I'm going to do is make the marks on the other side so that my little people are right side up instead of upside down. That's what's throwing me off here. Well, let's do that. Put the marks over there. So, again, going from the bottom of the mask. Let's see if you guys can see what I'm doing, what I'm marking. That maybe is better. We'll do 1.5 inches. Right. Do this guy. I think they will be right side up that way. This is like trying to do this with a fabric that is has a pattern on it. Very ambitious. Okay, so we've done 1 pleat. We're going to do the same thing on the other side. So take 1 mark, bring it down to 2 marks below it, and then the mark that's in the middle should be at about the middle of the pleated fold. And I'm going to just put a pin there, putting the pin perpendicular to the way that I'm going to be running the sewing machine. And then I'm gonna do the same thing on the bottom. So I'm going from this mark next to this little boy's head, and I'm bringing that down to the one by his bicycle wheel. And then we've got another pleat. So I'm gonna put another pin right there. Okay, and then I'm gonna do the same thing on the other side. So there's a mark right by this red car. That's gonna go down to the Arc de Triomphe. Okay. So there's my iron beefing. I told you it would do that. So you can see now it's like more of a traditional mask shape. It's got those pleats. Somehow we made 2 folds and there's 3 sections. I guess that's how geometry works. And what we're gonna do next is just sew straight down each of these sides. Again, with that 1/4 inch seam allowance, so right near the edge. And that'll just hold these pleats in place and we can take the pins out. So here we are back at the sewing machine. And you can just run right over your straight pins if you're using straight pins. If you're improvising and using something else, you might want to take it out right before you get there on your sewing machine, just in case it catches on it. You might break a needle. And same thing, I'm going to do just a couple stitches forward, a few stitches backwards, and then all the way down the side. So you're going through several layers of fabric here as you go over those pleats. And the same thing on the other side. So do it from the back so I can keep the edge where it should be in terms of the seam allowance. And if it gets a little bunchy, just sort of go slow and smooth it out as you go. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to cover your face. All right, Robin says my camera angle improved. Thank you for keeping me honest, Robin. If anybody else is out there besides Robin and my mom and wants to say hi, add some comments in that chat. Hi. Okay, so now we've got this pleated mask. I'm going to take out my pins because I don't need them anymore. It should be holding itself together now that I've sewn it. I've got a very full pin cushion here. Find places to put my pins there. So here you go. This is the sort of bulk of what your mask is going to be. I'm so glad I've got that happy little girl on the bicycle front and center. And now the only other step is to add the straps. So this is sort of the most labor-intensive part of this pattern. Because, you know, if you don't have elastic and you don't want to go out and get elastic, so that sort of defeats the point. It's really easy to make straps. It just takes a little bit of time. So the ones, there's a couple ways you can do it. If you want to be real fancy, you can fold them so that all the edges are inside. And that'll help keep it from fraying, make it last a little bit longer, you know, keep those annoying little strands of fabric from sticking out the side of your face. But if that is a lot of work and you don't want to do all of that folding and ironing, especially if you don't have an iron at home, you can also just cut it and then fold it in half, and then the raw edges will be out. Another suggestion I have, which is improvising a little bit from what's in the pattern, is if you have a piece of ribbon or something that's already finished on both ends, you don't have to worry about it fraying along the sides. You can use a piece of ribbon and just fold that. But basically, we're going to cut a piece of fabric, a long skinny piece of fabric, and then we're going to end up sandwiching the sides of the mask inside that fabric, like so. And then the ends are going to continue to stick out, and that's what we'll use as straps to tie the mask on. So if you have a piece of ribbon or something, or bias tape if you're a sewer, then that could be an easy fix. But if you don't, or if you really want it to match, then you can just use more of the fabric that you've been using and cut out 2 long strips. So I'm going to cut these, they're 34 inches long. That's enough to go, down the mask and have enough sticking out on both ends for ties around the top and bottom of your head. I'm going to make mine 1.5 inches wide. That's the sort of wider version that they suggest in their pattern, because I'm going to probably fold the edges in to keep it from fraying. But you don't have to be that fancy if you don't want to. Okay, so let's go back to a little table view here. So, what did I say? 34 inches long and 1.5 inches wide. I do have a nice measuring tape here. And again, I'm just going to mark right on the fabric when I get to 34 inches, because it's all going to be covered up, and also we can do what we want. There's no rules. And this is just the easiest way for me to do it. So here we go. I'm at 34 inches. I'm going to make a mark right here. And 1.5 inches wide. I'm not going to use this white part of the edge of the fabric. So I'm actually going to mark 1.5 inches, and then I'm going to mark it 3 inches, and then I'll just cut 2 strips at once. And I'll just kind of draw a line here. So this is how I'm doing it. I'm just measuring right on the fabric. I'm drawing right on the fabric. I've got no compunction about anything. I'm just going to make a mark sort of at various places along here at 1.5 inches, and then at 3 inches, so I know where the edges of my 2 strips will be. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect, just has to get the job done. I've got a nice ruler here so I can kind of connect the dots. And then I'll just cut right along those lines. So that's a lot faster than making a pattern. If you were making something really fancy, you might not want to draw on your fabric with just a regular ink pen. But we're going for function over fancy here. So I got this fabric in 2013, maybe, to make neckties, a necktie out of it for my friend who is, at the time was an elementary school French teacher, now is a middle school French teacher. I don't know if he still wears my fancy French neckties that I made him. But I thought, well, when you're an elementary school teacher, you get to be sort of funny. You get to wear funny themed neckties based on what subject you teach. Those are the rules. So I wanted him to be able to take advantage of that, which is why I have this ridiculous fabric. Okay, so now we've got, see my lines? I measured out 2 strips, 34 inches by 1.5 inches wide. And I'm just going to cut along my strips. These scissors do have a little bit of a squeak to them sometimes when I'm opening them back up. I don't know what causes that. They need to be oiled or something. But they're nice and sharp, which is the most helpful thing. Okay. So that's one guy. I'm actually gonna quickly cut off this white edge too. And that's like, who cares? I should have just put it right up against the edge. But no one's even gonna see that part of it. But can't help it. Just want it to be pretty. Only my pretty seals and balloons. And sewing is a good activity to be doing right now. I've been, in addition to making some masks, doing a lot of mending projects that I've put off for a long time. I have this dream that someday I'll put pockets into all the clothes that I own, because I wear a lot of skirts and dresses that don't have pockets, and that's ridiculous. I deserve better. So maybe as this continues on, it'll be a good time for me to finally tackle that project. Okay. Square off that bottom edge. Didn't do a great job there, but that's fine. All right, so that's one strip ready to roll. I'm just gonna quickly cut out the other one. I know it's like not the most exciting TV, but I wanted to do it in real time instead. I thought about like, should I prep the strips ahead of time? But then I thought, well, maybe some people will want to literally be sewing along while I'm doing this. And, you know, if you pre-prep things like that, then they can't keep up. So I guess there's always the pause button in that case if I'm going faster than you are. But part of the fun is doing it live. Okay, that's 2 strips. Da, 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 da. Cool. So basically we're going to make our own bias tape out of these strips. And if you don't know what bias tape is, that's fine, because it's kind of a sewing insider thing. And also I never use it for anything. But we're going to use the iron. I'm going to use the iron. You could also just use your hands. And we're going to press it in half long ways, all the way up and down. And then once we've done that, I'm going to kind of open it up and press the side in again to the sort of center crease that we'll have created. And do that on both sides. So on the end you look sort of like this. And it will fold up in the final product into a little skinny tie that you can use. So let's get the iron heated back up so it can beep at us again. I'm going to start just by folding the whole thing in half lengthwise and pressing that. And you know, maybe I'll do one side the fancy way, like that with the edges all tucked inside, and the other side maybe I'll do just a single fold sandwich with the raw edges out, in case you want to do that more quick method. Quicker, less finished method, which is totally acceptable. Still isn't very hot. Here we go. But yeah, one of the things I like about sewing is that it's very easy to undo your mistakes. It takes time, but it's forgiving, you know, much more so than working with something like wood. If you don't cut something exactly straight, if things aren't exactly the right size, you can usually sort of fudge it until it works. And if you sew something the wrong way, which I usually do if I'm working on a project too late at night, then you can just take it out and do it again. All it takes is time. Okay, so now we've got this long skinny thing that we have pressed in half long ways. I'm going to sort of open it back up. We've got that nice crease there now from the iron. And again, if you don't have an iron, you can sort of squish it with your hands and get it enough so that you can handle it. So I'm opening it back up, and I'm going to fold the sides back into that center line that I've now created. And then I'm going to press those, and I'm going to try and do it in a way that does not undo the center crease that I just pressed. So I'll just sort of use the tip of my iron on the very edge to keep it still creased in the middle, because we're still going to use that, but also get these little side bits in. So I know it's not actually the best camera angle, but I'm going to turn back so I can use the long part of my iron instead of doing it in 5-inch chunks there. So I'm just going right along the edge, pressing the edge in. And again, this is really like if you're using something that's comes apart really easily. Some fabrics fray more than others, but you can totally just use a half, a single press down the center rather than this whole complicated process if you don't care about having those raw edges. Again, if you were making like a garment that you were going to be wearing regularly or something special, you definitely wouldn't want to have any raw edges. But, oh good, Robin says the camera angle's looking good. But for something like this, hopefully we won't need it for too long. Fingers crossed. And it doesn't have to look professionally done. Just gonna keep some of those germs at bay, whether it's got raw edges facing out or not. So, nearly there. This is, the worst is almost over here with this project. This is the sort of really fiddly bit that takes a long time to fuss with. But once it's done, it makes it much easier when you're sewing it. Okay, so now we've got our own little bias tape that we made. So it's all folded in the middle and then folded again on the sides. And voila, it is now ready to be a tie on our mask. I am going to do the other one real quick while I've got the iron out. So this one I'll just do in half. We won't do the extra folds into the center, so we can show you how quick and easy it can be. And if you're going to do it just in half, you don't need to necessarily make it quite this wide. I think they say 3/4 of an inch in the pattern if you're just going to do it in half. But since I already cut it at 1.5 inches, we're just going to have one wide strap. And that's okay too. It'll be so fast. Okay. Beautiful. So now we've got 2 straps ready to attach to our mask. The first thing I'm going to do is find the center of the strap. You could measure it, or if you're like me, you could just fold it in half and find the middle that way. So here's the center. Again, approximate is fine. And I'm just going to put a pin there so I can remember that it's there. So that's the center of that strap, roughly. Do the same thing with the other one. Fold it in half, and then just stretch it out and see. And there's the middle of it. Great. That's the middle of that one. So here's our mask again. And again, we can sort of do the same thing to find roughly the center of the mask. It's sort of right in between those 2 pleats. So with my fiddly one first, I'm going to sandwich that, put the center of the strap right on the center of the mask. I'll take out my pin now that I know where I'm at. And then I'm just going to fold it down. So now it's sandwiched so that raw edge of the mask itself is held in between the two sides of that tape we just made. And the raw edges of the tape are also folded within it. So it's very fancy. It is a little bit fiddly to get the pin in that skinny little spot, but I'm just going to put the pin back in there, in through all the layers of fabric, which is quite a few layers of fabric at this point. Hold that in place. I'll probably do another pin at the top and bottom of the mask too, just to hold it all in place. And again, the pins go at a 90-degree angle to the direction you're going to be sewing so that you can sew right over them. Okay. Like that. So now we've got this attached to the mask. The rest of it, of those 34 inches that aren't right on the mask, are going to be the scraps. And you could, if you're worried about it, you could put pins in all the way along the strap just to hold it together while you do it. I think it's probably fine since it's pressed enough. It's going to kind of want to retain that shape. So I think I'm going to be able to manage it if I just sew it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew all the way from the tippy top of the strap. And I'm going to sew pretty close to the non-folded edge. Well, they're all folded, but not close to the center fold, but close to the sort of ends. And sew all the way down. Down, 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 down. I'll get to the mask, and I'll just keep sewing right over the mask. So through several more layers of fabric at that point. Keep going right along there. And then keep going straight down the other end of the strap. So it's one long seam, and it's accomplishing both sewing the straps to themselves so that they stay shut, and sewing the straps to the mask all in one. So let's do it. I hope that explanation made sense. Put comments in the chat if it did not. And again, if you want to be real fancy and have no raw edges showing, you can sort of start out by folding the very end in. So it's going to be trapped inside with the rest of everything. So you could fold that end down and then fold the whole thing in half, just to make it very professional. But that's extra credit. Okay, so here we go. It's a little bit tricky with such a tiny surface area that you're sewing, but I believe in you. Just get it on there, and again, if it gets kind of bunchy, don't worry too much about it. You can stop and start as you sew. And then once you get enough that you can sort of grab the other end of it, it's going to be easier. You can help guide it through. And I'm just holding it shut sort of with one end closer to me. And then with the other end, I'm using it not to pull it through, because the machine will pull it through on its own, but just to kind of guide the direction and put a little bit of tension on it. So you can put a little bit of tension on either end. That'll help keep all those folds folded flat. Let's see a little better. Okay, so So now we're getting to the point where it's attaching to the mask. This is the exciting moment. Okay, we've done it. It's attached to the mask. So now I'm just going to go continue straight down. And again, if you want to get real fancy on the end, before you sew it all closed, you can fold the raw edge at the very end in and then close it up. Just to make it extra secure and not have it fray. But, you know, follow your heart. Especially if you're a new sewer, you know, don't worry too much about putting all that finesse stuff on it. Okay, we've got one side attached to our mask. There we go. Look at us go. It's all attached. Okay, so now we'll do the other one. There's the iron angry at me again. So this one, like I said, we'll do it the less fancy version. We'll just sandwich it straight in between the two sides without worrying about the raw edges at all. So we'll open it up a little bit. I've got my pin here to show me where the center is. I'm going to put it in the middle of the mask, which is right here. And open it up, stick the mask inside, and fold it down. So you can see it's like a little wider than the other one, twice as wide actually. But it'll still get the job done. It'll still be a thing you can tie around your face. And it'll take not quite as long to press, especially if you don't have an iron. It's a good option. And again, if you've got something like a ribbon or bias tape, something that already has like finished edges, you don't have to worry about that fancy ironing at all. You can just do this version, fold it in half and use it to sandwich the fabric. Because you're not going to worry about that fraying. Sorry, I realize I should be showing what I'm doing instead of just talking. I'm now pinning this together inside its little sandwich. So there we go, just like before. I've got a pin in the middle and one on each end. And you can see like there's a little bit of fraying on the edge, but it's not too bad. And it's going to work just fine. So, and yeah, on this one, I won't do the fancy thing where I fold in the other end either. I'll just leave it all raw. Again, there's like some threads coming off, but it's not the end of the world if you shed a few threads. This is it, guys. This is the last step. And then we'll have a mask. I bet you didn't think you could do it so fast if you're playing along at home. This one, you could hand sew this pattern of mask. It's, again, because you're doing these straps instead of elastic, it's a lot more sewing than the other pattern I'm going to do next. But if you don't have a sewing machine and you don't have elastic, you can absolutely hand sew this. And I'll go over a little bit over hand sewing technique in a minute. But for now, let's finish this guy off. Right, there we go. I hope that was entertaining, watching someone else sew silently for a minute. But we got there in the end. I'm going to clip those threads off. And now we should have a completed mask. Let's see how it looks. All right, take my pins out so I don't stab myself in the face. Okay, so here we go. It's a mask. It's sort of a Franken mask because one side here is got the skinny tie and the other side has the wider tie, but it's totally functional. And okay, I never clipped these threads. This is always the part that I get lax about, clipping the ends of my threads hanging out. So you can tie it reverse. Yay! Thanks, Robin. I'm glad you're proud. And I tied it up top, tying it down below. And again, watch Sydney McElroy put her mask on because she's very good at it. She's a doctor. She's been doing this kind of thing a long time. But there you go. Now you have a mask. And it's so fun in French. It's not scary. It doesn't say, I'm sad because there's a global pandemic. It says, look how fun I am. I'm being safe. So that's that. Now I'm going to take it off. And I know one thing that Dr. Shaw from the Maine CDC has said is that sometimes if you're not used to wearing a mask, you end up touching your face more when you have one on. And if, yeah, I think that's a good point, and you may want to practice wearing it around the house a little bit before you go out, because if you're constantly trying to be adjusting it, then you're really not doing yourself any good. Robin asks, if the masks are for other people, should we wash before giving them away and not touch them when getting out of the dryer? Yeah, so I was sort of thinking of this tutorial as a mask for yourself. Obviously, if you're making masks to donate or give to other people, don't put them on your face after you take them out of the sewing machine. And yeah, I think it's probably a good idea to wash them, wash the fabric before you make it, but you're here, of course, breathing on it while you're making the mask. So it's probably prudent to wash them afterwards as well. I've heard folks who are soliciting mask donations say to put them in a plastic bag when you're done with them. Then they're not sitting around for your cat to sit on top of the table while you continue to make more. So I think just if you make sure that your hands are clean while you're handling them, and if you're making them for other people, you might want to consider wearing one while you're making them to avoid contaminating them. Yeah, so that's my advice. But I know that a lot of places that are asking for donations, like for healthcare workers or other folks, they have some specific directions up on their websites. And if you're looking for places locally that are looking for them, I know Healthy Peninsula has a great resource list on their website, which includes some information about where you can donate masks to local organizations. So we've done it. We did one mask. Congratulations, everyone. If you would like to stick around for mask number 2, I'm going to demonstrate a different pattern, and I'm going to do it sewing by hand, unless it gets too boring and people are like, just machine sew it to finish it. But we can just think of it as time to hang out all together. Okay. So this is a pattern from the CDC. Here's one that I made before. This is very simple mask, right? It does not have pleats like the one that we just did. It's just basically a tube with elastic. And you stick the elastic around your ears, and you're good. So again, the pleating is sort of there to hopefully make the mask more contoured and fitting your face better. But especially if you don't have a sewing machine or you're not comfortable sewing, a simpler pattern might be easier and less intimidating. And if you do happen to have elastic, that makes it really easy. You don't have to fuss with those straps. And again, if you're looking to donate these, I would check directly with the organization you're planning to donate them to about what their preference is, ties versus elastic. I think different places have different criteria for what they're hoping for. So in this case, this is the pattern from the US CDC. It's right on their website, which is also linked in the video description. But basically, instead of one long piece of fabric that we're going to fold in half, we're going to cut 2 smaller rectangles and just sort of treat them as one, use them in 2 layers. So this is 10 by 6 inches, and we're going to cut 2 of them. For this one, I've got some nice pink fabric that I think is a pillowcase that I'm cannibalizing, that I already started cannibalizing for another project. I think this was in John and Katie's wedding quilt, Mom. So when you are cutting 2 pieces of something, one pro tip here is that you can just fold the fabric and cut 2 pieces at once. And then you don't have to do it twice. So again, I'm going to make sure that I'm not trapping other bits of fabric that I don't want underneath, making a mess of things. And I'm just going to fold this in 2. And then stick my pattern piece on there. It doesn't have to be on the fold. It doesn't have to be anything at all. Just 2 rectangles. And like, you know, again, if we were sewing something fancy, if we were sewing a dress or something that had to hang really straight, I would be checking about grain line and like making sure things were square and lined up properly. But this is not that. This is just 2 rectangles of fabric to cover your face with. So I'm not going to worry too much about that. Instead, I'm just going to make sure that I've got 2 layers of fabric here. So I've pinned my pattern at the quarters, got my sewing scissors out again, and away we go. And yeah, if you don't even want to hand sew, there are some great patterns and tutorials out there for no-sew masks made out of t-shirts. So if you've got an old t-shirt that you're willing to sacrifice to this project, the CDC has some instructions on that on the same page that I linked to. And there's also a blog post that I found that has a cool pattern that uses sort of the stronger parts of the t-shirt as straps to automatically go around your face. So I linked that as well. So we've got a couple no-sew options there if you're looking for something, but you just don't have the tools or time or skills to do a sewing version. Okay, so now we've got 2 rectangles. As you can see, there's 2 layers of fabric here. It's important to have 2 layers. That's what the CDC says is going to help the most. Just more than 1 layer of fabric. And again, you're looking for a pretty tight weave of fabric. Obviously, you still need to be able to breathe through it, but you don't want something really loose like linen or silk because more particles are going to be able to pass through it. And if you are interested in masks in general, the podcast Sawbones did a really good episode about the history of masks in medicine recently, which I found very fun. So if you're looking for more listening on the subject. Okay, now I have to remind myself what the CDC said about their seam allowances. I know it was a 1/4 inch on the other one. Okay, 1/4 inch on the long sides and 1/2 inch along the short sides, which makes sense because, so we're gonna hem the top and bottom of this, the long sides, just so that the raw edge isn't sticking out and fraying. And then the short sides we're going to turn in a little bit wider because we're basically making a pocket that we're going to thread the elastic through. And they're assuming that you've got pretty thin elastic. I've got, what have I got? This little guy, about this width, does fit in the 1/2 inch seam allowance that they're prescribing. But if you only have thicker elastic, you might want to consider cutting your fabric a little wider and then turning it in a little farther so that you have bigger pockets to string your elastic through. And if you don't have elastic at home and you really want to use this method, they also recommend you could use a hair tie. hair ties, one on either side. So that might be a little tight, depending on how sprung out your hair ties are, but it could also be just fine. Okay, so I've done enough sewing that I pretty much know what a 1/4 inch is, but you may want to do some measuring. So again, you're going to line these 2 pieces of fabric up, treat them as if they were one, and on the longer side, we're going to turn it just a 1/4 inch in. And again, you can sort of take your measuring tape if you have one and double check, but it's basically like a little if you don't want to measure the whole way. I am going to do some pinning. In this case, since we're hand sewing, you don't have to worry as much about, making sure that the pins are totally perpendicular because you're not going to be running a sewing machine over them. So since it is a really little seam to hem, if you want, you could put it long ways if you're going to hand sew it. That wouldn't work well for a sewing machine because your sewing machine would be going right over the head of the pin, but if we're going to be sewing it by hand anyway, then why not pin it the way that's easier to deal with on the fabric? Just trying to get your pin in and out in that little 1/4 inch is a little bit tricky. I can do it, but why bother if you're going to hand sew it? If you are going to do it on a machine, then yeah, just sort of, it's finicky, but take the time and put the pin through the proper direction like that. I'll give it one more here, just to keep it from buckling. Okay, so here we've got a very sloppily pinned long seam, 1/4 inch seam along that long edge. Okay, so I'll sit back down for this. If you have never done any hand sewing before, it's not hard. You can do it. I believe in you. You will need a needle, so a small sewing needle. Ones that are designed for hand sewing should have the eye at the top, as opposed to ones you use in the sewing machine, which have the eye close to the point. You need some thread. Doesn't matter what color. Again, these are not going to be treasured heirlooms. If you want to get a color that's close to what you're using, then feel free. But if you only have, in my case, an abundance of red, then use red. So I pulled a bunch of thread. I usually we're going to double the thread over to make it a little stronger. So you can usually go sort of like from the spool out as far as would be comfortable for you to pull, and then do that again. And that's about as long as I will cut. Because otherwise you're dealing with like, as you're trying to pull the thread through. Okay, I'm going to thread my needle, which is like, there's not a real trick to it. Just having young eyes is helpful. So I'm doing it now while I can. There are needle threaders. If you have one of those, you can use it, but obviously don't go run out to the craft store for one now. But just have good light and go slow, and you will get it through the eye of the needle. Okay, so I've got it, threaded the needle, got both my ends here, and I'm just going to tie them in a little knot. So tie the thread sort of around itself and make a big loop. It's so hard for me to show. There we go. And then I'm putting the end back through the center of that loop. Can you see it at all? Basically tie a knot. Just tie a knot. And then tie it a couple more times and try to get it to sort of land in that same spot. That just takes practice. And a lot of people who I've taught sewing basics to get really frustrated when they can't. They're like, I'm tying a knot, but it keeps like ending up in all these different places. And that's just practice. See, I just messed that one up too. So basically it just needs to be a thick enough knot that it won't pull through the fabric, which if you're using a good thick weave like we're supposed to, then it shouldn't be too much of a problem. I'm going to cut off the tail. So the knot is like all the way at the end. And we're just gonna use a really simple stitch for this. You just go in and out. So, you're gonna replicate what your sewing machine does automatically. But in this part where I've got the fabric folded over, I'm gonna stab into it. Do it backwards so you can see. Just go through all the layers. So it should be 4 layers, right? Because you've got the 2 that are folded down and then the 2 that are sort of back behind it. And I'm stabbing through it. And then I'm pulling up through the other side. I'm going to pull all the way until my knot catches on the edge of the fabric. So now I'm on the right side where the fold, the raw edges are not. And I'm just going to go back through to the other side. So now it's coming back through on the wrong side. And, your stitches should be pretty small. I guess again, like something like this, it doesn't super matter. So again, going back through, started on the wrong side, it's coming out the right side, and I'm pulling it out. And it might catch a little bit on your pins because your pins are all sticking out willy-nilly, but just pull it off of them and keep going. You don't need to pull it like super tight. Just like pull it until it's all the way through. And yeah, I mean, my stitches are pretty little, but that's just what I'm used to doing. Yeah, I usually do pretty thin little stitches. The more stitches you do, the more secure it will be. But you can do longer stitches and it'll just be holding it a little bit looser. Which again, like none of us are necessarily needing this to be perfect. So you can see now I've got totally very homey stitches. They're not necessarily perfectly straight or all the same size, and that's okay. It's going to give it that real made with love feel. So obviously this takes much longer than doing it on a sewing machine, but I just wanted to make sure that I did demo this because there's lots of people who don't have sewing machines, but maybe you have a needle and thread at home somewhere. Maybe you know enough to sew on a button, but you haven't really made anything before. And this is a great project to start with. I mean, not ideal circumstances, certainly, but a little square where you're just folding in 4 edges. That's a great simple project to start with. It's sort of like making curtains, but on a very small scale. So I'm continuing to just go in and out from one side to the other in a line. Again, I'm not pulling my stitches super tight, just, pulling them through until it naturally stops. And, as you go, you can take out the pins, right? You don't need this pin anymore. Now that I'm past that point. So that'll reduce the likelihood of you stabbing yourself as you continue to sew. And, I really recommend putting on some good music or a podcast, maybe a show that you like that you don't have to watch the screen too closely, because this is going to require some of your visual attention. But one nice thing about sewing is that once you're figured out what you're going to do while you're just doing it, it doesn't really require any of your verbal attention. So you can, talk on the phone with somebody or listen to an audiobook. You really aren't using that part of your brain, which is kind of refreshing right now. I think that's why I've been enjoying doing some sewing projects. So it's like straightforward, simple, and not using that part of your brain that's really tired from like reading the news and keeping up with everything that's going on. So we are going, look, we're a quarter of the way through. So as you can see, it's a longer process than doing it by machine, but it works just as well. You can keep it rolling. And yeah, I might end up machine sewing the other long side of this just so that we can, keep it moving here. I'm sure not everyone wants to spend their whole night watching me sew quietly, but I wanted to make sure I gave a good demo of what it would look like if you needed to do it by hand, because it's totally possible. And all it takes is a little bit of time. There we go. Get it nice and tangled up. But like I said, it's all possible to undo. So if you get tangled up or you get a knot while you're doing it, don't panic. Just do your best to go slow and disentangle it. And if you truly can't untangle your knot, then you can cut it off and try to find a way to tie off what you've done, or just take it out and start over. I think my stitches are getting longer as I want this side to be done sooner. Maybe a little bit longer than they were at the beginning. Yeah, and again, if you don't have pins, you can just sort of fold down the edge as you go so that it's in place by the time you get there. But you don't need to have straight pins to do this. You can just hold it in place as you go. Again, we're not looking for perfection here. We are just hoping to be functional. I don't know. It says we've got 3 people watching. I know my mom is here. I know Robin is here. I don't know who the third shy person is who's not in the chat. But we may have other folks who want to watch later. And this should stay up as a recording on YouTube after the fact. So if you have folks in your life, the 3 of you who are watching, who you think could use this extremely long form tutorial instead of the many shorter ones that exist online, then you feel free to send them this URL. And if they have questions about what I'm doing, they can email me at the library, hannah.cyrus@bhpl.net, or they can call the library, 374-5515. Leave a message for me at extension 11, and I will get back to them and hopefully answer their questions. All right, we're closing in here. Getting there. How's everybody doing out there? Hopefully today was a good day. We had some nice sunshine. That helps. It always helps. I thought it was going to be rainy all day, but it ended up being beautiful here. And again, if you have an iron, you might want to press this 1/4 inch seam down before you sew it. That might, especially if you have an iron but you don't have pins, that's a good way to help make it a little easier on yourself. We are almost there. Right. And I am going to try to make it so I finish up on the wrong side. So you've been looking at the right side this whole time. It's very pretty. I have probably been pulling it a little tight. It's kind of puckering, but that's okay. It's all going to be swooshed around your face anyway. So I'm going to, for my last stitch, push it back through to the wrong side of the fabric. Come out here. And then tie it off to keep it secure. So basically I'm just going to take a little bite, one more little extra stitch, but instead of going through the other side, I'm just going to go sort of in and out on this side. And then instead of pulling it all the way taut immediately, I'm going to pull it until there's a little loop left. And then I'm going to stick my needle through that loop and pull it taut from there. And that should tie sort of a little knot in the end. And to make it extra secure, I'm gonna just make a big loop, put my needle through it again. And if you sort of put your thumb or another finger on where you want to tie off, as you pull it through, that'll sort of keep the tension there and make sure that the knot is going to form where you want it instead of like way down the line. There you go. You've sewed one side of this mask. Unless anyone wants to chat an objection, I think I'll do the other seam on the machine just to make it go a little faster. So speak now if you're like, no, I like this slow TV style, just quiet, quiet hand sewing for another hour. The fans demand it. So I'm gonna just, again, fold it over. I'm not really gonna measure a 1/4 inch because I sort of know what a 1/4 inch looks like. It's just a little bit. I'm gonna put a pin in, and this time I'm gonna be good about putting my pins in the right direction so that I can run the sewing machine over them. You know, this is gonna mess people up, my whole idea of the timeline, that people could do it in real time with me if they were hand sewing, but since there's only a few folks watching live, and so far nobody is objecting, I think it is probably a better use of everyone's time to just do it on the machine. So again, this time I'm doing one on each end, and then I'm gonna sort of pull it taut in the middle. Keep it from getting super bunchy, although again, it is all gonna get kind of bunchy once we put the elastic in it. So perfection, not the goal. You take one thing away from this live stream, it's that it's okay if these masks aren't perfect, especially if they're for yourself. Obviously, if they're for a healthcare worker and you're gonna give them away, you wanna try to do as good a job as you can so they'll last and, you know, not be falling apart as they're trying to wear them. But for yourself, to go to the grocery store or the pharmacy when you need to, it's okay if they're not the most beautiful thing in the world. Okay, I'm not seeing any objections, so I'm gonna go back to the sewing machine. This is also my kitchen table, because I don't have a lot of table space in my apartment. So sometimes I just sit where I was just sitting and I look across from me at the sewing machine. It's like my favorite dinner companion. All right, and we're gonna do it in blue because I don't wanna take the time to rethread the machine. So this is gonna be a really funny looking mask, but that's okay, because it's gonna be just as effective with blue thread as with pink thread. So we go forward, we go back, forward again, and we're sewing this little 1/4 inch seam. Okay, so fast. Cool. So now we have done as we were told. We've got a rectangle that is got a 1/4 inch hem on both sides of the long side. And I'm going to take my pins out of it. And then the only other thing we need to do on the mask itself is do the same thing on the short sides, except longer. So we're going to do 1/2 inch instead of a 1/4 inch, folding in on the short sides. So, and again, I think I'll just machine sew these since I'm not seeing a lot of folks clamoring for more slow, sedate hand sewing. But everything that I did last time would apply this time in terms of technique for hand sewing. And that's 1/2 inch. And I might make it just a little more than 1/2 inch because my elastic is, I think, a little bit wider than what the CDC is designing for. So again, based on the width of your elastic, you may want to give yourself a little more slack here. And you may, in fact, want to cut a wider rectangle if you know you're going to need a lot more slack to fit in some bigger elastic so that it's still, you know, enough covering your actual face, which is the point. So fold in this side. So yeah, I'm doing sort of somewhere between 1/2 inch and 3/4 inch. Probably 1/2 inch would do fine. I just want to give myself some extra wiggle room so I can make sure the elastic will go through. Okay. Again, if you do have pins and you're pinning and you're not used to using pins, you want to go sort of like straight down into all the layers of fabric, push it through, and then angle it over a little bit, and then back up through all the layers of fabric. So it's really holding everything together nicely. Alrighty, let's run these through the sewing machine real quick so that we can get it over with. My nice blue, sky blue thread on my pink mask. It's like a sherbet. So I'm gonna go pretty close to the raw edge here because what I'm trying to do is create a pocket between the fold and the seam that I'm about to sew, which is where the elastic is gonna go. So I'm gonna sew pretty much just, you know, not right on the raw edge because you need to be in from it a little bit so that it doesn't just like fray apart underneath your seam, but closer to the raw edge than to the folded edge for sure. And that's one side. And here's the other side. Great. So now we've got both sides sewn up, nice little pockets. Take out my pins. Pin. Okay. So as you can hopefully see, we've created a little pocket here. There it is. That's where we're going to put our elastic. So according to the pattern, we want a 6-inch long piece of elastic. I've got one already cut from something else, just happened to be 6 inches. So I'm just going to use that as a measure for the second one. And again, approximate's fine. Okay, and then the kind of fun part is that we're going to thread this elastic through those little pockets that we just made. The perfect tool for this is actually a safety pin, so I'm going to grab one of those. You can use other things if you don't have a safety pin at home. A bobby pin will work. You can kind of sandwich your piece of elastic in there, but really a safety pin's basically ideal. I'm going to open it up, I'm going to stab one end of this elastic and then close it. So now my elastic is attached to my safety pin, and that just provides a nice little handle for you as you thread it through. So I'm going to go into the pocket that I just made with my safety pin, and then if you sort of scrunch it up and then pull it, scrunch it up and then pull it, you'll get that elastic threaded through it. Now you may be thinking this is a pretty short piece of elastic for going through this whole pocket, but it'll stretch. So, and you might run into a little bit of turbulence here at the end as you're trying to get it through. You've got a lot of folded over bits here. You know, the long edge is folded over. So just sort of wiggle it around until it gets through. And just make sure you don't lose your other end as you're pulling it out. So now we've got both ends of our elastic, and I'm gonna take the safety pin off. Now if you have like cord elastic, the easiest thing is probably going to be to just tie it in a knot to itself. As we say in my family, if you can't tie a good knot, tie a lot of knots. But since this is like flat elastic, it's not going to tie that well. It's going to be pretty bulky. So I'm actually just going to pin the ends of it together for 1 second and then sew them together on the sewing machine real quick. You could also totally sew them together by hand. Basically just like tie a knot and then go through, in and out, around the same spot over and over, just to secure it together. So before I do that, I will thread the other piece of elastic through. So get it on my little safety pin shuttle, put it into my pocket, and scrunch and pull. I kind of like this part. For some reason, I've always really liked threading elastic and things. I don't know why. It's just somewhat satisfying. Okay, I got it coming out the other end here. Whoop, did I lose my end? No, I almost did. Gotta watch that other end. Okay, I'm gonna take it off my elastic. And same thing, I'm just gonna pin the ends together, just overlap them a little bit and pin them together. Like so that I can sew them up. So let's do that real quick, and this is the last step. And again, this is like, you're not really sewing a seam. You just go back and forth a bunch of times, forward, reverse, and secure it together. Nice and secure. It doesn't have to look pretty because this is all going to be on the inside. In fact, mine does not look pretty at all. It's just a real mess of thread here. But it's okay because we can just move it around so it's on the inside of the mask. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing with the other side, just forward and back a bunch of times so that it's nice and secure. Okay, get all those loose threads off and take out my pins. Okay, so now if you want your ugly ends that you've sewn together haphazardly to not be so visible, again, not like we're really trying to make a fashion statement with these, but you can just sort of pull and stretch and squish until it's more on the inside of your pocket. There you go. Now no one has to know how messy it was. And that's it. You have made a very simple, very straightforward cloth mask with elastic. So now it looks less like a rectangle and more like a tube because it's got that elastic, but the elastic is nice and stretchy. So you put it on your face, stretching, and you stretch the ears, elastic around your ears. I've got too much hair for this style. And voila, you're wearing a cloth face covering. Ta-da! So that's what I got for you guys in this brave new world of digital at-home library programming. I hope some of that was helpful to some of you. Thanks for watching, Mom. If anyone has any last-minute questions that they want to throw in the chat, feel free to send them my way. Or like I said, you can follow up with me later at the library, hannah.cyrus@bhpl.net and 374-5515. If you've got any questions about mask sewing, about anything at all, I am here to help. So send them my way. Hooray! Thanks, Mom. And yeah, let us know if you'd like to see more of this sort of thing during this time. We're very much trying to figure out what is working for people, what formats are good, what subjects are good. So if you'd like other sewing tutorials, I will have more practice next time. Let me know if you have ideas. Okay, thanks for watching, everyone. I'm going to end it.